Hi everyone, as people are joining, just saying hi. Feel free to confirm if you're hearing me okay, since this is just me. I'm seeing a lot of people logging in now. Good to see everybody, or to see you virtually. Maybe I'll wait a minute just to have a few more people join. Hi Rita. Thanks Paula. Great. I hope everybody's having a good Sunday. It's quite sunny here in Virginia. It's been very nice weather actually in the last 2 weeks or so. It's been beneficial for me as a patient. It's starting to get cooler now here, but it's within like a good range of temperature. So yeah. Okay, so today this is basically a live Q&A. The idea being that this is an opportunity for people to ask questions related to CIRS in some form. I'd be happy to answer them in person. There are people who sent questions in advance that I would like to go over as well. But in the meantime, feel free to post questions. I'll have a chance to look at them. I'm first going to go over the questions that were sent to me first and sort of just address those as well as I can within a reasonable time. So, okay, so I think we have a few people. So, one question that was sent to me in advance was the question of whether VIP, that is vasoactive intestinal peptide, the neuropeptide that we take as part of the CIRS treatment protocol, if that can cause worsening of symptoms. Another question that was related, and I'm lumping into this question, is fatigue a normal side effect of VIP? So these are good questions. And like I said, they're coming from two different people, but I'm lumping them into one because they're touching on the same issue. And the general answer should be no. Generally speaking, VIP as the last step of treatment in the Shoemaker protocol should not lead to a worsening of symptoms, at least not in terms of sustained long-term worsening of symptoms. That said, there could be different reasons why you may be observing a correlation between symptom worsening and use or administration of VIP, the nasal spray. So one possibility, which is more often the reason why people may be experiencing worsening of symptoms with VIP, is because you're dealing with some kind of biotoxin exposure in a systematic way such that your body is sort of stuck in treatment. And I've seen this myself with people who are doing VIP. They start feeling better maybe over the course of the first month or so. And then they start stalling with VIP. It's like they either don't feel getting better, or they just feel like they're backtracking, or they're getting some weird symptoms. And in my experience, those have been always tied to symptoms, exposure to biotoxins very often. And I'll give you an example, and I talked about this in, I think, my last workshop that I gave. There was a person that I was helping go through the Shoemaker steps, and this person has started VIP, doing really well in an apartment that was really good. I think it was a Hertzme of like 3. And then somewhere along month number 2 of VIP, it was like VIP was giving this person anxiety and a lot of weird mood issues. And so we started thinking about what could be going on. And at this point, we hadn't introduced the cleaning product Fantastic, which now we know is one of the more useful cleaning products for actinobacteria specifically. If you're dealing with sensitivity, this is one of the go-to products as of now for dealing with actinobacteria. So we incorporated the fantastic cleaning product, and we started cleaning, this person started cleaning the refrigerator, which is where VIP is stored as a supplement, and to clean the kitchen and just do thorough cleaning. And very quickly after that, VIP started having a positive effect on the person. Shortly after introducing the fantastic cleaning regimen in the apartment, but I think also the fridge was kind of like a place that was becoming a source of contamination. And again, it doesn't have to be water damage related. It's just that if you have actinobacteria, which can grow in your skin, it can be in personal items, it can come from other people, it can come from, there could be many sources that you can bring in things into the apartment. These things can sneak in, and then suddenly your immune system is reacting to the presence of these bacteria and their toxins, and then suddenly you're like, don't feel like I'm moving forward. So that's just one example of someone who, once we figure out the exposure situation, VIP started to continue to sort of provide mostly benefits, really, in terms of feeling better, in terms of noticing improvements in different areas. So that's number one. Number two, which is essentially exposure, but it's a different kind, which is MARCoNs. If you're dealing with a MARCoNs overgrowth, if you're one of these people who's having a hard time dealing with MARCoNs, it could easily be countering some of the benefits of VIP, one of them being elevation of MSH, alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone, which is a very important hormone that most of us will have deficient, and we need to upregulate. So making sure you're addressing MARCoNs, that you're doing some kind of at least maintenance nasal spray treatment to try to keep MARCoNs offset, and as part of your cleaning regimen, personal items and things like that, that's going to be important. So that could be another potential source of stalling your treatment. And then the other thing I'll say about feeling worse, sometimes what you experience as a worsening of symptoms could actually be your body's way of returning to normal. So you have to pay a lot of attention to that. You want to ask yourself, were these symptoms present sometime in the past and then suddenly starting coming back after VIP? This is something that some people experience, myself included, where sometimes as you start getting better, you start seeing older symptoms creeping up temporarily from, let's say, a few years ago or before you started getting really sick. I've had a lot of those things happen throughout the treatment, but they tend to be temporary, and it's almost like the body's kind of regressing or going back in time into the initial time point. I don't think it's exactly that, but there's something about that. So you want to make sure you are, you want to try to tease those apart, that it's like, okay, maybe this is just a step in the recovery and it should resolve. If you're having sustained feelings of feeling bad, feeling fatigued all the time with VIP, I'm really thinking there's something about exposure that is not being addressed, that needs to be further addressed. And it doesn't have to be, like I said, water damage. It doesn't have to be, structural problems. It could be residual stuff that can grow just by virtue of, if you're not cleaning properly, if you have items that are a little bit questionable, pieces of furniture, things like that. So anyways, so that's the first question that I wanted to address. The second question that someone asked was, why should certain haplogroups or haplotypes avoid Gardasil, which is a vaccine, and how does that relate to CIRS? This is a really good question. This is right for the HP virus vaccine, and there is a haplotype, a gene variant within the CIRS population that has been tied to multi-susceptibility to different biotoxins and potentially susceptibility to problems dealing with this vaccine for the HP virus. the Gardasil vaccine. The basic idea, I'm just going to touch on this very as simply as I can, is that what's happening in CIRS is a lot of the patients, a lot of us, are going to have what we call defective antigen presentation. What does that mean? We have two parts of the immune system, the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system, and they kind of complement each other. They kind of do different things in terms of keeping in check our bodies from foreign invaders and infections, right? So the innate immune system is the short, fast-acting part of the immune system that's sending your first line of defense into the trenches, firing at will at everything. And so when you're having fever and things like this, headaches, asthma because you're really sick, you're very congested, this is the innate immune system mainly in action. And then you have the adaptive immune system, which comes later when you're going through an infection period that essentially is going to create the antibodies to properly manage that infection and then create a memory trace for it. So you need these two sides of the immune system in order to work properly. And there are these intermediate immune cells called antigen cells that basically sort of establish communication between the two sides. So it tells the adaptive immune system, hey, there's this particular fragment or invader. It has this specific DNA sequence. I'm giving you a piece of information about it. And then the adaptive immune system creates a memory trace. It starts producing the antibody, essentially. So in a normal, healthy body, what happens, right, is the antigen cells present this information correctly, and then the adaptive immune system sort of goes to work. What's happening in CIRS is that a lot of us, most of us, I think about 90 to 95% of patients, according to studies, we have one of these haplotypes, these gene sequences, that are associated with antigen presentation that seem to have defective mechanisms with certain things in terms of presenting the specific antigen of a given invader, right? And so for us, right, there's going to be a number of biotoxins. It could be mold, it could be something from a bacteria, it could be from a spider bite, it could be from algae, that the antigen presenting cells are going to have a difficult time recognizing and telling the adaptive immune system, this is how you get rid of this thing. And so that's when we run into trouble, because the adaptive immune system now is blind to that. It doesn't recognize it, right? And so this is what starts triggering the innate immune system to start going more aggressive, more inflammation, and then it becomes more sustained and chronic, and that's basically chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So why am I saying all of this? Because there's some work coming from the Shoemaker group that have found a pattern that there was an association between a very specific haplotype, which is the 11352b, which is also known as the multi-susceptible haplotype. And so there was an association between having this haplotype and increased susceptibility to CIRS if the person had a history of the Gardasil vaccine. Okay, so that's coming from the Shoemaker side. So why would that happen? Because vaccines work, the underlying concept is the same thing as getting sick and exposed, meaning the vaccine is going to contain a piece of an antigen, a dead fragment of whatever it is that you're trying to create antibodies for, right? But you don't go through the process of getting actually infected. So it sort of bypasses that process. But what happens when you have a defective immune system that doesn't know, that's not ready or equipped to take in the antigen because it doesn't have the information, right? So if you're one of these people that have issues with the HP virus and the sort of any antigens coming from that, then the vaccine is going to be a problem for those people. I think it's about 1% of people that would fall in this, so it's not a very high number in the population at large. But nevertheless, the idea being that these people may be at increased susceptibility to becoming sick with CIRS if they get the vaccine because of this poor antigen presentation. That's it. Outside of CIRS, we don't have a lot of research on this about vaccines and immune dysregulation. But we do have a few studies that have reported a positive correlation between post-vaccination symptoms and specific HLA haplotypes, some of which fall under the list of CIRS haplotypes. And the studies that have been done have been mainly tied to transient short-lived symptoms. So things like fever, chronic joint pain, and narcolepsy. And this is, the research that I know of is specific to the flu vaccines. But again, these are short-lived. Interesting, there's a recent study in 2017 that reported sort of nervous system dysfunction in a group of young females. These are 12 to 24-year-old girls that reported this nervous system dysregulation after taking the HPV vaccine, which I thought was really interesting. They don't look at HLA markers in these patients, but they do speculate in the discussion of the possibility of specific haplotypes that may have predisposed these young female patients to this type of reactivity. And if you read the paper, it very much reads like CIRS, and they allude to things like sick building syndrome. A lot of these categories of chronic illnesses that people just don't have good ways to talk about in the literature. So that's sort of what's going on with the Gardasil vaccine and CIRS. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so the next question is, what if I can't get rid of MARCoNs? So, I mean, that could mean different things. But going back to the first question that I addressed, the very first thing is, if you are dealing with an active biotoxin exposure, clearing MARCoNs is going to be very difficult to achieve. It can become sometimes impossible because it's this vicious cycle. Exposure to biotoxins can suppress MSH. That allows MARCoNs to overcolonize the respiratory tract. And so then MARCoNs will further suppress MSH. So you're trying to get rid of MARCoNs, but you run into a sequence of exposures and you don't address them, then MARCoNs just comes back and further suppresses MSH again. So there's this vicious cycle that you have to figure out how to interrupt. That said, I do want to say, there is a lot of ongoing debate right now in the medical community with the CIRS practitioners as to how to proceed with MARCoNs treatment. So if you've heard Dr. Shoemaker talk about MARCoNs recently, he has been expressing a little bit of skepticism or concern in terms of whether MARCoNs can be fully eradicated or not. And some doctors have patient populations who seem to be able to restore the MSH and seem to have no issues with MARCoNs, but other doctors seem to be having some issues on clearing MARCoNs. I think that my personal take on it is that people are moving more into the idea of trying to suppress MARCoNs as much as you can as you're progressing in the Shoemaker steps until you start hitting VIP, but not necessarily eradicating MARCoNs. It may not be possible to fully eradicate MARCoNs. What you can do is maybe weaken it so that over time your immune system starts to recalibrate, starts to regain control, and eventually it takes over and MARCoNs no longer becomes a threat. And I think MSH is really the most important marker for that to happen. So it's kind of like this tug of war sort of between MARCoNs and bringing MSH levels back up, and then MARCoNs. And the idea is you want to eventually get MSH at a level that's high enough so that then MARCoNs stays low. So that, I think, is now where people are thinking more and more that instead of thinking, so the more important question is not so much whether you eradicate MARCoNs, it's whether you can restore MSH levels, and then figuring out what does it take for your brain to start producing MSH again. So those are slightly different questions, right? Once MSH starts going back up, that's, like I said, that's going to keep MARCoNs and other potential bacterial overgrowths in check, including candida problems. All these things if you start raising MSH levels, I mean, it may not be the only thing, but it may be, in some cases it may be, in other cases there may be other issues that need to be considered. But that may be sufficient for some people if they're deficient in MSH to start bringing that back up. And then all of these overgrowths in the digestive tract and the mouth and different tissues really in the body start to sort of go back to normal more easily. So yeah, the next question is, can endotoxins from the gut drive CIRS? And this is another question from someone else that I'm going to lump into as well, which is, does CIRS have any relation with Helicobacter pylori? So the reason I'm lumping this question about the Helicobacter pylori is because it is associated with endotoxins. And for those of you who don't know, endotoxins are toxins that are produced by what we call gram-negative bacteria. These are bacteria that had a very specific profile, biological and structural functional profile. And the answer to these questions, right, can endotoxins from the gut drive CIRS, and is there a relationship with Helicobacter pylori and CIRS? The answer to those is probably yes. It may depend on how much endotoxin presence we have in our bodies, and remember that endotoxins is one of these toxins that can trigger CIRS and that can make our immune system become hyper reactive and stall our progress from recovering. Usually endotoxins come from sewer water, wastewater, things like that. So, feces and things like that. That's where you're going to find really high levels of endotoxins. But endotoxins can also be found in bacteria that are growing inside our digestive tract. And we know from research that gram-negative bacteria, when they're present at high concentrations in human tissues, so whether that's the gut, dental gums, lungs, the genitals, that is going to lead to an increase in endotoxin levels in our blood. And this is usually what happens when there's some kind of underlying infection in our bodies that's coming from one of these bacteria. We're going to have elevated levels of endotoxins. So what are examples of gram-negative bacteria that can produce endotoxins? So these can be E. coli, Salmonella, Bartonella, variants from the Klebsiella family. I have an infection with a variant of the Klebsiella family, and we suspect this has kind of been a big problem in my CIRS profile since I was a kid, which has led to a lot of dental issues. And at some point, it's something that I'm going to be trying to manage. So there's also Mycoplasma, and then there's also Helicobacter pylori. All of these, in some form, have the capacity to produce endotoxins. So if you suddenly have dysbiosis in the gut or something like that, there's a possibility that some of these gram-negative bacteria start overgrowing, they start producing more endotoxins. And there's research, it's actually a really good perspective piece, a very recent piece, I think it's from 2021 or 2022, that provides a really good overview of the literature on endotoxins and how it leads to inflammation in the nervous system and the brain, and how it may be one of the main contributors, if not the main contributor, for many forms of neurodegenerative illnesses like Alzheimer's and things like that. So there's good literature out there to suggest that if you have way too many endotoxins running in your body, eventually they're going to make their way, or their presence is going to be felt in the brain, and it's going to induce systemic inflammation. It's going to damage your brain. Eventually it can start leading to all the problems that we start seeing at the molecular level and Alzheimer's, sort of all these enzyme plaque buildups, amyloid plaque formation and things like that. So my answer is that yes, that endotoxins in the gut, if you have one of these infections, could probably causing issues in terms of feeding into the circle of hyperimmune reactivity from the immune system, because it's this overload of endotoxins that are coming from from the body, not just externally. So something you want to talk to your doctor about for sure. So the next question is the Vibrant Neurosumer lab test helpful to reveal infections and status of health? I don't know much about the Vibrant Neurosumer. I know it's a test that you can do that it can provide some additional information regarding some forms of viral infections, and it's going to tell you something about immune dysfunction in the brain and in the nervous system. And I think it's done by looking at specific markers of antibody production within the central nervous system and the brain. And some of these, I think, can be used to look at certain kinds of chronic infections. I think they're mainly viral infections, I think. But I'm not very familiar with these tests. I don't have anything against them. I think if you want to do this type of testing, it's fine, but I would not use it as a replacement for any of the standard CIRS testing protocols. So those are the basic blood work that you can get from LabCorp or from a Quest, right? That's one. Number two, a NeuroQuant, which is a brain scan to look at brain abnormalities in the form of changes of brain volume. Or three, the Gini test, which is another blood test. And actually, this is what I would recommend if you're trying to get information from immune dysregulation, inflammation in the brain tied to immune reactions. The Gini test is the way to go for CIRS, which looks at a long list of biomarkers that signal specific patterns of gene expression, gene activity that can tell us whether you're reacting to mold, whether you're reacting to actinobacteria, whether you're reacting to endotoxins, whether you're reacting to a combination of those, whether you have problems metabolizing glucose, whether you have metabolic dysfunction, whether you have viral infections. We can tell if you have a Lyme infection or whether you've had a Lyme infection in the past. We can tell whether you're having bleeding or coagulation disorders doing this test. We can tell whether you're suffering from PTSD, why you're having potential suicidal thoughts. We can tell whether you have internal endogenous sources of pro-inflammation that are not just specific to CIRS. We can tell whether you're chemically sensitive, why you're chemically sensitive. All of this you can get from Gini. So, and it's all geared towards CIRS. So if you're gonna go that route, it's not a cheap test. It's $700 or $750, and then you might have to pay additional money to get it interpreted by a shoemaker practitioner. But it is totally worth the money if you want to get that level of information to get a sense of how is your body dealing with this illness in terms of infections and the status of health more generally. But if you want to include the Vibrant Neurosumer lab test in addition to any of these tests, by all means, you can run your experiment, you can collect data and see, and you can talk to your doctor about it, basically. So next question is how to treat mold when you also have parasite infections. So the first thing I'll say about that is I want to make clear that in CIRS, when you're doing the Shoemaker protocol, you're not treating an active mold infection. And that's not what usually we have anyways. We're not suffering from an actual mold infection, although it may seem like that on the surface. What we're suffering is we're suffering primarily from a dysregulated immune system, right? An immune system where on the one hand, the antibody producing factory has shut down. It's not reacting to antigens properly. And on the other hand, you have very elevated levels of inflammation coming from your innate immune system, hyper-reacting to things that it shouldn't be hyper-reacting to. Not in that sense. Because we're dealing with reactivity to things that are already dead. There's nothing to kill in that sense when we're dealing with the chronic inflammatory response syndrome. Although there could be chronic infections. Very often people will have Lyme. Very often people will have things like Bartonella. There might be Epstein-Barr viruses, any of the bacteria that I mentioned regarding endotoxins. There could be a lot of things like that. But the excessive inflammatory response is ultimately because of the immune system reacting to the dead fragments, to the biotoxins. And so the whole point of the treatment is to calm down that immune response and to, over time, reset it so that it's back like this instead of being like this, right? So you want it to be sort of in this range, in this frequency range. And the treatment, that's what it's doing. And so with that said, if you have a chronic infection, this is something you want to talk to your doctor about. I'm not a clinical doctor, so different doctors have different strategies, but one strategy that I've seen doctors do is if they suspect you have a chronic infection like Lyme, for example, or even maybe parasites, as you're doing the Shoemaker protocol, if you're doing it correctly, the person should start to get better in some areas. And then what's happening underlyingly is you're correcting that immune response. So the immune system now starts to become better able to fight these infections. Sometimes even the immune system on its own starts doing a lot of the work for you. Once you start getting that regulated sort of level of immune function. And of course, like very often, these infections will do some kind of herbs or medication and antibiotic treatment if necessary, depending on the treatment. I've certainly done a lot of herbs, and they've been very helpful. But I noticed that what I was doing before the CIRS treatment or at the early stages of treatment in terms of treating infections, it was very superficial. It wasn't really getting rid of the issues. I would feel better maybe for like a couple of days, and then I would backtrack. So I had to really go through the Shoemaker steps. And then eventually I started noticing that the herbs started to work better, that it's almost like the body starts putting pressure on these infections. So you start taking certain supplements that can help in that regard. So for parasites, I would suspect the same logic applies. It doesn't mean that your body won't start clearing parasites along the way. And if you feel like you're capable of doing some kind of parasite cleanse during the protocol, along the steps of the protocol, you can do it. You can talk. You want to talk to your doctor, but in principle, there's nothing wrong with that, other than if your body's not ready to do that because of all the immune dysregulation and the inflammation that's taking place. That can really make you feel worse. It can really worsen things if your body's not ready for doing that. So something you definitely want to discuss with your practitioner. If you have multiple doctors, some people work with like a Shoemaker practitioner, and then they have like a functional doctor, and sometimes they'll get different opinions on this to see when is the best time to start working on this. But yeah, so that's what I would say about that with parasites. Okay, someone's asking about the details about the blood work, the labs, so things like MMP9 and C4A. So I don't have time to talk about every marker that we look for at CIRS. There's a lot of content out there, and I'm happy to, in my next mailing list, by the way, I have a mailing list where about once a month or so, we'll send out a newsletter with some information for people, resources, and things like that. So in the next mailing mail that we send, in the next newsletter, I can add a link with a thorough breakdown of all the markers. But I'll just say very quickly, what we're doing with these markers is, we're looking for patterns of immune dysregulation, like I just said. And there's two sort of basic categories for immune dysregulation in the context of CIRS. One is excessive innate immune activity. So we're looking for markers that tell us, is the innate immune system in overdrive? And those are markers such as MMP9, VGF, C3A, C4A, and TGF-beta1. So these are names you're going to hear a lot, and they're associated with innate immune activity. And often they're abnormal in CIRS, not necessarily all of them. Some of them sometimes all of them. But yeah, so that's one category where we're looking for evidence for CIRS. And the second category is what I'm calling metabolic regulating hormones or peptides. So we're looking for whether there's loss of immune and metabolic loss of regulation of the immune and metabolic hormones. And what are these? These are MSH and VIP, right? And so MSH is a master hormone basically that's produced primarily in the hypothalamus pituitary axis of your brain. And we know in CIRS that the hypothalamus is initially the most susceptible brain region. It's really what leads to all kinds of dysregulations in the system, in the body, including, you know, everything from hormones, digestion, immune functioning, circadian rhythm, pain, sleep. You know, there's a lot of things that part of the brain is really important, and that's why we start like losing control over our bodies. So MSH is a really important marker of that, and then VIP is the other hormone or peptide that's produced in different parts of the nervous system, but also in the digestive tract. There are different parts in the body, but in the brain, there are parts where it's produced. And we know that those start to drop because of the inflammation, the damage that the hypothalamus is taking. So those are the two basic categories. And if we start seeing abnormalities in those together, that helps us create the picture of a CIRS patient, right? So that's what I'll say about markers right now. And you know, Genie, as I already mentioned, Genie has a bunch of other biomarkers that are tied to patterns of gene expression. So it's at a sort of molecular level that's happening here. Here we're looking at what we call proteomics, or protein production in the blood, and those are the markers that we see with the standard blood work with CIRS. The next question is, can you recommend the best online brain game apps, or if there's one? This is an interesting question. So the two commercial options that I'm aware of that I know have research behind them are Lumosity and CogMed. Those are the two companies that I know of that have had quite a fair bit of research where they have controlled studies. They have intervention training paradigms, and they show some kind of benefit from these cognitive brain games. I think CogMed has a lot more research on clinical populations, so patients with ADHD, I think even Alzheimer's. They have some stuff where they've looked at that and how these people can benefit from these brain games. What I will say about this, as a cognitive scientist myself, with these brain game apps, there's a lot of contention right now about whether these training games really improve cognition long term. It's highly, I'm not going to say controversial, but there's a lot of debate right now. There's a lot of mixed literature in the mainstream scientific domain. I think if there's any kind of consensus right now is that if there are benefits, they are short-lived, and they are mostly limited to specific tasks that are very similar to one another in terms of transferring cognitive skills from one task to the other. That's more or less the consensus, but again, I think there's a lot more research that needs to be done because this is a very new area of research. It's not very old. It's like maybe a decade old, maybe a little bit more. That's very new. I would say I would be fully supportive. I would encourage people to, if they want to do the online brain game as a way of sort of engage in some kind of cognitive task, I think it's worth it if you have the time and the resources to do it. The way that I would think about it though more is I would think of it more as a tool to keep track of how different cognitive abilities improve over time as you're doing the Shoemaker protocol. I think that's a very useful way to think about these game training apps, especially once you start taking VIP in the last step of the Shoemaker protocol. If you have any brain abnormalities tied to CIRS, VIP is supposed to start improving those abnormalities, and that should translate to improved cognition in different areas. So maybe that's not something you can tell subjectively very easily as you're progressing. Often, in fact, a lot of patients who have a partner or a family member will tell the doctors, oh, I'm noticing that the person is, my husband, my wife, whoever is suffering for CIRS, that they're getting better from the outside, but the patient doesn't necessarily see it. So this could be a good way to objectively see, oh wait, I'm getting a little bit better. I'm noticing like, you know, like my speed is better. I'm performing better in these tasks over time, every, you know, couple of months or something like that. So that's how I would use it personally, because it would give me data in terms of, and it's kind of like magical to see that process of seeing your brain coming back online after some period of doing this treatment. But it may have some training benefits. I would say that if there are any benefits, they're more likely to show up in clinical populations that have brain abnormalities, cognitive problems. So we're an ideal candidate for that. So, you know, in other studies where they looked at ADHD and Alzheimer patients, so patients where you're going to expect not ceiling effects, so poor executive functioning, those populations may benefit from these tasks or these games more than the healthy population, because a lot of the studies that have been done with these game apps, they are coming from healthy population, young adults, and you may just not see the benefits there. So I think it's an interesting question. I fully support it. Like, there's nothing wrong with trying, but certainly from the perspective of keeping track of how your cognition improves, I think it's very powerful for someone in their healing journey to see that in an objective way. My message here being, you want to find ways to assess your progress objectively. Don't rely, I mean, subjective well-being is really important, and it's really part of your healing journey. I'm not saying it's not. Like, it's from there you're going to have intuition. Intuition is going to be very helpful to navigate, you know, environmental problems and things like that. But there's going to be points where subjective well-being is not going to be necessarily telling of how you're progressing objectively. And you want to make sure you're keeping track of that, whether it's with the Shoemaker blood test, the Genie, the NeuroQuant, or something like a brain game app like Lumosity or CogMed or something like that. So I think it's really important to invest in that as much as you can. So I think this is my last question here from that were sent to me prior. This person is asking, I'm wondering if I can keep things that are laminated, manufactured wood, or wood tables or chairs while I am cleaning. So the way I'm going to try to address this question is, I'm assuming the question has to do with if you're moving to a new place, or I'm going to at least address that part. Whether you can keep, essentially, can you keep stuff that has laminated manufactured wood, or, you know, tables and chairs? If they're cleaned, is it something that would be safe to bring to a new place? I think, honestly, this is always, there's always a risk. It's a trade-off. You're either going to play it very conservatively, or you're going to play it a little bit more liberally. Me personally, whenever I've dealt with moving, I err on the conservative side. I try to move with as little as I can, especially if I know I'm moving to a better place than I was previously. If you're coming from a water damaged space, I would say furniture is probably not worth keeping. It's going to be a headache. Potentially, it's very likely that it's going to stall your treatment progress. And then you're going to be wondering, oh, I'm not getting better even though my house is new, and that kind of stuff. I don't think it's worth the hassle. I know it's really hard because some of us and some of you are coming from places where there's a lot of furniture, a lot of things to get rid of. But if you're from the baseline, if you're coming from a water damaged space, you know that it's water damage. The only things that I would keep would be small items that are not porous, and then clothing I found to be able to recover with very proper cleaning. Even that can give you some trouble. You might have to do multiple washing and you know, and bringing the clothing outside, get some fresh air, and it might take some time for you to stop reacting. You might need to be on the Shoemaker protocol in order to start building a little bit of tolerance to that. So I think that's the rule of thumb for me. Let's say you're going from one good house to another, then what I would do, if you have laminated stuff that's easily cleanable, that's not like just having things stick to the surfaces and you can't really clean them with a wipe or something like that, if you feel very confident, what I would do is then just try to figure out a system to bring one thing at a time. One thing at a time into your house. Don't bring a bunch of things together into your house. And then maybe if you have the opportunity to do this one thing at a time, give yourself at least 2 to 3 days with this item in the house, in the new place, and see if you notice any changes in symptoms, how you sleep, how you're eating. Are you having histamine reactions? It doesn't have to be reactions immediately. It could be a delayed reaction. It could be the next day after you introduce it. That's why I'm saying 2 to 3 days. That's the safest way to go about this. And then, of course, there's going to be cleaning protocols that you can do for these kinds of things. Fantastic EC3. You can mix some borax with some water and then spray it. You can have alcohol wipes being used in these surfaces. Trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, there's other things, essential oils that you can try, and you can do a thorough cleaning. I would say also, if you're bringing this piece, having an opportunity to air out the furniture is going to be really important. So not just clean them. If there's like a window you can open, or even if you're in a safe space, like an area that's like good air quality where it's not troublesome outside, I would even try to get the piece of furniture exposed a little bit with sunlight, get some fresh air on a nice sunny day. Get that air exchange, because some of the stuff that you're trying to wipe is not going to come out very easily unless there's a lot of air exchange. So that's what I would do in that situation. So that was the last question that was sent to me. So now I'm going to turn into questions from the live. Let me see if I can pull out the chat here. Feel free to post them on the chat. I think I might have seen a few earlier, but I want to, feel free to post the questions now on the chat. Trying to see if I can find my way. Okay, so someone's asking, do you really have to leave your clothes if they haven't been near the mold? With clothing, like I said, what I was alluding to was that I found clothing to be more easily salvageable. I think, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. You may be reacting to clothing because you are someone who's suffering from actinobacteria reactivity. And you might be someone who has actinobacteria growth in your skin, which many people do. It's kind of like a normal thing. But if you're one of these people, then clothing they're going to become an extension of you. And so, you may be reacting to clothing sometimes because of actino exposure, whether it's the chemicals or toxins that they're releasing. So, like I said, the only times I've had to get rid of clothing is if I buy them from a store that's in really bad shape. One of these stores, if you go, let's say, to, I don't know, a Target or a shopping mall where you're walking and you're like, you're passing out, you're really dizzy, you're fatigued. Those are places, actually, I'm hesitating because I remember I have my winter jacket I bought from a very moldy shopping mall in New Jersey when I was living in New Jersey, and I'm still using it. But I think the material matters. This is like a waterproof material, so it's not, it's not like wool or some kind of fabric like that it's much harder to get rid of whatever you're reacting to. So I think certain pieces of clothing that have like waterproof material are going to be easier to salvage for sure. Other materials are going to be harder, especially if they're coming from a store that's just very problematic. I think your best bet is to not even try it. I mean, if you can try it, but I would certainly try that outside the house first, just to be sort of careful for that front. So other than that, I've been able to keep clothing, bringing them from different places, even from living in mold and things like that. You just have to be very thorough with cleaning. I hope that answers the question. So another question here says, best diet for CIRS, carnivore, plant, and meats. The short answer to that is, I don't think there's a one diet fits all type of thing. I think in general, everyone in this illness is going to eliminate certain food categories. They're going to eliminate processed foods. That's like a given. They're going to eliminate very high sugar foods, not fruits. For some people eat fruit and they're fine in CIRS. They're going to eliminate unhealthy fats, so fried vegetable, vegetable oils that are not that easily oxidized. I'm not talking about coconut oil or even olive oil if you take it sort of normal temperature. I'm talking about the vegetable oils that you can use to fry. Those are highly unstable, even with subtle changes in temperature. So those are problematic. And canola oil, obviously, peanut oil is very unstable. Things like that are going to be very, very problematic for us. It can really backtrack our recovery from our illness. So I've met people who are doing carnivore and that's how they feel best in this illness. And then there's people like me who I've done the carnivore diet for short periods. It helped me when I was really, really sick, but once I started getting things going, my body has always wanted a certain level of carbohydrates. And so for me, it's all about cruciferous vegetables. I eat very high amounts of broccoli. I cook them very well though, so to make sure my body can digest it. Asparagus, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, those are kind of my go-to veggies. So I eat about 30 grams of fiber a day from those. I do eat onions, I eat garlic, I eat avocados. I was eating olives, but because of the lactic acid as an ingredient, it can trigger histamine flares, and it certainly has done that for me. So be careful with olives. If they have as an ingredient lactic acid, it might cause a lot of histamine-like issues or even fatiguing issues in your body. At times when I feel the best, I've been able to introduce things like bell peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers. Those are kind of categories that I think are very safe for not everybody, but for some people. So for me, I kind of need that amount of dose of fiber. I'm not eating any starches. Avocado has a little bit of amylose, but it's really low. But I'm certainly not eating any starches. I'm not eating fruit at the moment. I do think it's not a bad idea if you can tolerate eating fruit in some capacity, low sugar fruit. I think it's fine. And eventually, as we get better, keep in mind, as you get better, you complete the Shoemaker protocol, you should be able to reintroduce a lot of foods. Maybe not all foods, but you should be able to eat like your dose of starches, at least, I don't know, in whatever capacity. I know people who are healed from CIRS and they're even eating bread and gluten. I'm not recommending you drink alcohol, but they're able to even drink some alcohol. So it's just that during this process of the treatment, which can take time, it can take a year, 2, 3 years, it can take some time to really normalize the body. You want to listen to your body and see what is it that it wants. So I guess the short answer for me is low carbohydrate but high fiber and a lot of healthy fats. And no matter what, I do think it's important to have a lot of healthy fats and a lot of protein. I think that's the pattern that I see with a lot of people who are kind of with the illness and sort of doing the treatments. There could be exceptions to that, if you're having issues absorbing fats and things like that. But yeah, I guess somewhere between carnivore and a plant-based diet that's gonna be low in amylose, although not everybody has amylose issues. But if you're in that category, then removing amylose and then maybe sticking with cruciferous vegetables and things like that. Basically a low amylose diet. Okay, so a few more questions. How much okra powder would you recommend to take per day as binder? That's a good question, but I don't have a good answer to it. It's just we don't have any established dose for okra at this point. There was a time where I was doing okra powder. I forgot the name of the brand. It was like, I forget the name, but I think each capsule was like 600 milligrams. When I started doing this, I eventually did like somewhere around 15 capsules per dose, just to give you an idea, where I felt like it was kind of doing something. It was kind of helping me offset, things like exposure and things like that. So honestly, what I would say is if you haven't passed your visual test, that should be your indicator of how much okra you need. Start doing okra and then test your visual test. If you pass it, then you've reached a dose that works for you. If you're failing it, then that means you probably need to go higher. And if you start going really high and it's not moving the needle, then that to me suggests you have to then consider something like Walco or cholestyramine. Essential oils for mold. I personally have found that the best ones are peppermint, tea tree, eucalyptus, and oregano oil. For me personally, I think peppermint and tea tree are at the very top for me in that list. Yeah, so those are the essential oils, and there's a product called Defense. It's like a body wash product. I highly recommend it. It has tea tree oil in it. It's really good for body wash. I'm actually using it for laundry now. I just put a couple drops. Check it out. It's on Amazon, Defense. And they have different products, but the body wash is particularly really good for me, at least. Does the HLA gene go in remission? It's funny. I was just having a conversation in a group, in the CIRS group actually, which is run by JC and Barbara from the CIRS group. Someone was asking it was kind of putting a similar thought process. My sense, and I'm not a molecular biologist, I'm not a geneticist, but my sense is that when it comes to HLA susceptibility, it's a little bit more like a binary outcome. So either you have the instruction manual properly to deal with, to relay the information to the antigen presenting cells so that they can communicate with the T cells, which are the part of the adaptive immune cells that are going to create an antibody. Either you have the information stored in DNA that is going to give the right instructions, or you don't. Now, so there's two things there. Either it could be that what we're susceptible to, genetically speaking, is just one biotoxin. It could be, for me, it could have been, I don't know, mold, or it could have been an algae. It could have been just one biotoxin. But then as I started getting sicker and sicker, the adaptive immune system started to shut down, and then I started to become more sensitive to all kinds of biotoxins. So suddenly the pattern starts generalizing. And then with the CIRS treatment protocol, I think what my sense is what it's doing, it's bringing back your adaptive immune system online. And so all of those excessive reactivities are going to calm down, maybe shut down completely. But in principle, you may still have the susceptibility, the initial susceptibility that you have from your HLA. This is why the CIRS patients who recover, they will continue doing low doses of VIP and binders long term, every now and then, and whenever they run into an exposure, because we suspect that there's always susceptibility no matter what. However, it could be that some people, the antigen presenting mechanism is not a yes or no. It might be like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I don't know enough about it to really provide a very thorough answer to that. But if that's true, then what we need to be focusing on is ways to alter expression of that, of how sort of figure out how can we boost antigen presenting functionality. I think that's, we're not there yet, but I think it's something that sounds to me like something that can happen in the future, maybe not too far from now. Okay, what labs do you recommend to measure inflammation? Well, basically, if we're in the domain of CIRS, like I said, the blood tests that I mentioned, MMP9, C3A, C4A, TGF-beta1, VEGF, those are the innate immune markers usually tied to inflammation from the innate immune system. So yeah, you can look at other things outside of that, but those are the core CIRS inflammatory markers that often people will look for. And then in addition to that, look at your alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone, or your MSH levels in your blood. So that's kind of like the basic. Another question, can you become more tolerant to mold after going on the treatment and living exposure? Yes, that's the point of the treatment. With the VIP, if you've been doing the steps properly, if you remove yourself from exposure, you have an environment that's friendly to your body, and you make sure you're not having MARCoNs issues in the form of it's controlling your upper respiratory tract, and you've passed the visual test. Once you start VIP, it might take time. It might not be a month or 2 or 3. It might take 7, 12 months, a year. It could take 2 years for some people, I've heard of cases where it's even longer for them, where they're doing a dose of VIP. Their tolerance starts going up, and they stop reacting to things, and eventually, these people are able to go back, and they go to a grocery store, and they can take these hits, and they come back and they're okay. That's sort of the goal, or one of the goals of the treatment protocol. Let's see. How long should it take me to feel the effects of VIP? Like I said, it varies a lot. Some people start feeling changes within the first 2 months. Other people, they might not start noticing anything until later, 4, 5, 6 months. And like I said, I used to think that this was like a 12-month thing. I think it varies for a lot of people. I think some people, if they're in very ideal situations, and depending on how their body is and how they react, they may be able to do a regimen of 7 to 12 months of VIP, and they're back in shape. Other people might really need to be in it for a long time. And so it might not be that they don't see like the very sustained benefits until past a year, So I what I'll say about this is, you have to be very patient with VIP. Think about what's going on. You're trying to reverse serious brain abnormalities, serious damage to your cells that have been unfolding over the course of decades in your life, probably since maybe you were born or since you were a kid, and you're trying to do that in a span of a year. That shouldn't be possible, to be honest. We shouldn't be able to do something like that quickly. So I think giving yourself time and be patient is going to be your best friend for many reasons, but that's one of them. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. So do you think cell membrane support would allow long-term resiliency so that biotoxins that we are susceptible to cannot lodge themselves into membranes, causing undesired gene expression / illness? Yes, absolutely. I think of the things that I personally think are the most important things that you can do alongside the Shoemaker protocol, and certainly after the Shoemaker protocol, is supporting your cell membrane. So phospholipid therapy is definitely at the top. And I've done 2 live events with my dear friend Ali. Many of you probably know her now. If you haven't checked that out, checked out the 2 videos. I think those are can be very informative, and I'm certainly invested in this. I've been doing this treatment, and I've personally noticed, especially, I've been doing it for about almost a year now, where I've been doing this, and it hasn't been until the last like 3 months where I started to notice like there's something that these things are doing for me that are helping specifically with feeling less reactive to the environment. So absolutely, and I plan to take these supplements after CIRS. I do think they'll help me sort of stay in remission after I'm done with the treatment protocol. So that's my personal take. So what are some of the things you did to heal from CIRS that no one else talks about? Ooh. I haven't done this. I'm about to. I have a root canal, right side. And I think, personally, I think this is half the reason why I'm sick with CIRS. It's taken a long time to figure out the pattern. Some of my previous doctors strongly suspected I had some kind of infection, but I wasn't testing positive for Lyme. Like the markers were not really showing up for some of these classic ones. And so we think it's, now that I'm getting better, we think it's coming from the root canal. And I tested positive in my MARCoNs test, my last MARCoNs test. When I did it, the nose swab, I tested positive for one of these gram-negative bacteria called Klebsiella aerogenes. And it's one of the most prominent bacterial infections in dental and cavity problems. So this thing, I think what's happening is it made its way from the root canal, and it's now like all over the parts of the respiratory tract because of the immune dysregulation. So I think part of my treatment, I haven't done this, but I think part of completing my protocol is going to be remove the root canal. And I think once that happens, the body's really going to fully come back to functional, whatever that means, because I honestly don't know. I've had these issues since I was 6 years old. So I don't really know what's it like to not live with these issues. So we'll find out, and you guys will find out. You'll see me go through this process. So, okay, there's a lot of questions here. I'm gonna take 10, let's see. Whoa. Hyperbaric chamber ozone therapy. Hyperbaric chamber. Yes, great for, especially if you have poor oxygen delivery, which is very common in CIRS. Especially, some people will do it early on in treatment, but I think it makes more sense once you're out of exposure and you pass the visual test and you're thinking about VIP. I think this is where the hyperbaric chamber can be tremendously helpful. Some people might do it from the beginning. It really depends on what your doctor says. Ozone therapy, same thing, not until after treatment. Not until you're in the, what I meant to say is not until later stages of treatment. I mean, you could do it. I did ozone therapy before doing the Shoemaker protocol and didn't do anything for me. It's just not tackling the fundamental problem. So they can be helpful, but the timing needs to be right. Exercise while recovering from CIRS. Yes, it's really up to you, whatever your body can tolerate. Absolutely. If you're doing exercise and the moment you start feeling like unusually fatigued, even if you're like just taking some steps and that triggers fatigue, so that's how you know that's kind of your threshold. You don't want to push much further than that. But you can always probe and just do whatever you can before hitting that point of like maxing out basically. Over time though, you should start building more tolerance to exercise. So whatever kind of exercise you can do, absolutely, yes. Thoughts on RG3? Yeah, I mean, it's one of the compounds for synapsin, and synapsin is one of the go-to supplements for neuroinflammation by some of the Shoemaker doctors, most notably Dr. Andrew Heyman. It's a very potent supplement. It has nicotinamide, riboside, and then RG3. The only thing I would say, just more from research side and from my personal experience, I was having a lot of bleeding disorders when I got at one point in CIRS, and I noticed that if I took certain blood thinning medications or supplements, I should say, like curcumin, RG3, they would seem to exacerbate these symptoms for me. So just kind of something to ask your doctor about. Maybe you can do a panel on bleeding disorders like von Willebrand's profile, something like that. Tinnitus caused by CIRS. Yeah, I have it. It goes up and down. Sometimes it disappears. Yeah, there could be many different reasons for that, but it is a super common symptom. I guess I've gotten used to it, but I wouldn't mind if it went away, for sure, eventually. How am I feeling currently while recovering from CIRS? I've had a lot of ups and downs. This year, it's been, during the spring, I had moments where I started feeling better, and then I hit a point late in spring where I felt a little bit off. I was really actually quite off. And then June and July hit, and I was feeling very sharp during those months. Then I kind of went down in August. In fact, I, for the first time, started failing the visual test mid-August in a really long time. So that suggested there was something in my apartment. And so I became much more aggressive with cleaning, and then I was able to pass the visual test 1 month later in September, and I started to feel better again around September. I think for me it fluctuates a lot. I can go from, like, I don't know, 50% to 70%, 75%. That's kind of like realistically the range. I've had streaks of a couple of weeks where it's like 75%, and so that's really, for me, it's pretty good. I know there's a lot more that I can get. I've had moments where I feel like 80-85%, to be honest, but I just don't count them as consistent enough. So yeah. How does cholestyramine work if you are not being exposed to CIRS? It's a binder. So what is it actually binding? It's binding to biotoxins. I can assure you that you're exposed to biotoxins virtually every day. The question is, are you exposed to water damage biotoxins? If you're in a situation like that, then the rate of exposure is just way too much for your body to handle. But if you're in a non-water damaged space, you're still going to have some biotoxin exposure. When you go to places, even in your apartment, I can assure you that there's going to be something. It's just that, like I said, the rate may not be as aggressive, so that you start binding and then you can pull out enough biotoxins while keeping that rate of exposure under control. So you should think about it more in terms of you're minimizing exposure. You're not eliminating exposure 100%. I don't think that's possible. So that's how cholestyramine keeps us in check, right? It ensures that rate of exposure stays low inside the body. Because the moment you have way too many biotoxins circulating in your digestive tract into your liver and recirculating, well, you're going to have sequences of inflammatory waves, cytokine explosions that are going to affect your brain. But yeah, so that's how I would try to rationalize it. Have you seen henerosiderin deposits in the brain after recovery from CIRS? I understand gray matter and caudate nucleus improvement, but Dr. M, who's Dr. M, says that those deposits can go away. If you can clarify who Dr. M is, I'm blanking out. I haven't seen this, like myself, I haven't seen any data, like I haven't had a chance to look at this specifically in anyone. It makes sense though. It makes sense that some of these deposits would go away in the same way that with CIRS, once you start having severe brain atrophy, you start seeing some hallmarks of cognitive impairment and eventually maybe Alzheimer's. And so Alzheimer's, right, is characterized by high deposit amounts of amyloid beta plaque formation in specific parts of the brain. So presumably this can be happening, and we have biomarkers in Genie that can potentially tell us whether that's happening at an early stage. And so presumably, like if the brain starts regrowing back to normal levels, you might see improvements in that front. But I can't speak personally from looking at data. So okay, we have about 10 more minutes. Let's see. Yes, I'm saving these live so we can go back and watch it. Yes, this will be posted, and you'll have it in the page. Thoughts on coffee with CIRS? Some people drink coffee and they're fine. I know some people who do, and they're doing okay. I cannot be near coffee. It was one of these things that I feel like contributed to progression of feeling sicker. I'm not sure why. Could have been different things. I have thyroid issues. I know that caffeine can mess up your thyroid. So there's that. There's obviously the mold in the coffee. That's kind of like the most obvious place to think. I haven't tried a mold-free coffee. I will certainly want to do that once I feel like I've crossed to a point where I can reintroduce a lot of foods. So yeah, I feel like if your doctor has concerns about it, I would definitely listen to what they have to say about why they may not recommend coffee. Either way, it may be a temporary thing. I think for a lot of people, they might be fine to go back to coffee once they're done with treatment. So, yeah. Oh, so Scott McMahon. Yes, Scott is great. If he's saying that, I would certainly take his opinion very seriously because he's very well versed in a lot of this stuff. Scott McMahon, and he's the one who's published the papers on brain atrophy in CIRS and treatment. So that's great. So, am I getting a MARCoNs that's in my espoused root canal area? I'm not sure if I'm going to do that. It might. People have done it. I know some people have done this in order to track MARCoNs. It's just that my MARCoNs nose test when I did my last test of MARCoNs, and in fact, all the tests that I've been doing for MARCoNs, this other bacteria keeps popping up, which is a very prevalent bacteria in dental cavities. And yeah, so because we haven't been able to pinpoint any other infections in my case, I've done a bunch of different tests, including even Genova and GI maps, things like that. And yeah, there's this Oasis, but it's not clear there wasn't any clear evidence of an actual chronic invasive pathogen type of thing in those tests, other than just this Oasis. So I could do the test there, but I'm not sure if I'll do it. I think for me it will be, we'll see, to be continued, I suppose. Yeah. Am I sensitive to EMF? I used to. When I was living in New Jersey, before I started the binders with Welco, I was very, very sensitive to EMFs. Very sensitive. I would walk around electrical grids outside and it felt like a current just hitting my body. It was really weird. Wi-Fi, I had to, at that point, I had to wire the entire apartment. So no wireless stuff in my apartment. I was very, very reactive to it. It was really bad. I don't think it's necessarily the EMF though. I think a lot of people, I know they think it's EMF. There is some research showing that these radioactive frequencies can stimulate, can excite fungi. So candida and things like that. They can get hyper excited in the presence of these things. So it's not clear to me if it was directly the EMFs or if it was something, you know, things that were latching onto these things that were just making, you know, and I was living in a moldy apartment at this point. So I think what was happening is the EMFs were kind of triggering these other biological things to become more hyperactive. This is just my hypothesis, and it's based off research where I've seen that these things can interact in that sense. And so in CIRS, really, usually the culprit really is the biological organisms. They're the big problematic players. And then that leads us to become chemically sensitive. That leads us to become sensitive to electrical signals, to radio frequencies, things like that. But once I started taking Walco, it went away. That just went away within a couple of weeks. I stopped reacting to EMFs. If I go somewhere where there's a lot of exposure and I start working on a computer, I might start getting lightheaded again. But it has to be like not a great place, and I have to be sort of like I would have to allow myself to backtrack quite a bit in order to get to that point. So let's see. I mean, those are all great questions, and we're almost done. I'll maybe take one more question. I don't know if I skipped any questions. How did you do with cholestyramine initially? I've been put on the commercial kind with sugar and afraid the sugar is causing issues. I never did cholestyramine. I always did Walco. For different reasons. It was much cheaper for me. So cholestyramine, I thought it would be a bad idea for me to do the commercial one because of what you're saying, the ingredients. Some people, it will wreck them, and then they won't know if it's the cholestyramine or if it's the ingredients. For me, if I took the commercial cholestyramine, that would be just a really bad idea. So I agree with your thinking here. I would strongly suspect that can really throw off your body. So for me, it's always been Walco. The other reason is it's more practical. It's in tablets. I never liked the idea of having powder. It's just a lot of work for me. And then the cholestyramine powder form, it can affect your enamels. I have a lot of history of dental issues. I think it's just for me safer to not take cholestyramine unless I really need to. If my doctor says, you need a higher, something more potent, let's go for cholestyramine. But I haven't had to do that so far. Okay. Have you tried PCIVs? I have not. I know other people have, including Ali herself. I haven't done PCIVs. I think though, if you have the resources and the time to do it, it's not a bad idea. I don't know when would be the best time to do this. I think though the supplement, the oral forms in high dosages will get the job done. So yeah, I'm more than happy to hear if you get to do it, what comes out of it. Okay, were you taking binders in the moldy apartment? Yes, I was taking binders. I had about 6 units of iAdaptAirs in that apartment. I did some very extreme cleaning regimens. I had a lot of things. I had UV lights. I had a lot of things in that apartment. And that's the only reason why I was able to take binders and pass the visual test while living in that space. If I didn't have any of that, it would be like instant, like just backtracking every day. Okay, so we're gonna stop here. This is great. So many people with a lot of questions. I hope this was helpful to people. Like I said, this is gonna be uploaded into the Instagram, and yeah, I hope you can benefit from it, and looking forward to doing another one of these in the future. Okay, so stay safe. I hope you're all doing okay, and we'll be in communication. Have a good rest of the weekend.